We got some water here for you in case you'd like it.
I'm City Councillor Paula Fletcher, and I want to thank everyone for joining us here tonight at Dieppe Park to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Dieppe Raid and to honor those from Toronto who participated on August 19, 1942. This evening, we'll hear moving stories from a few family members of Dieppe soldiers, and we'll be unveiling a commemorative display to tell the story of the participation of Toronto residents at Dieppe. The city acknowledges that we're on the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many, many diverse nations, Inuit and Métis peoples. The city also acknowledges that our city is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and the Chippewa. We are joined this evening by family members of those who served at Dieppe, as well as representatives from the Canadian Armed Forces, the Royal Canadian Legion, and the brass quintet of the Band of the Royal Regiment of Canada. Thank you so much for the music you're providing for us this evening. And I would now like to invite Deputy Mayor Stephen Holliday to the podium to bring remarks on behalf of Mayor Tory and the City of Toronto. Deputy Mayor.
Well, thank you, Councillor Fletcher, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us here to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Dieppe Raid. It's also known as Operation Jubilee. A very, very important, a violent day, a day that by this hour, they were totaling up what had happened over those 10 hours. I'd especially like to thank the families and descendants of those who fought at Dieppe who have joined us. It's an honor to have you here. The fact that we're holding this ceremony in a park dedicated to the Dieppe Raid shows us how deeply this action affected Toronto. In 1942, there was only about 600,000 people living in Toronto as we know it today, representing about 5% of Canada's population. If you indulge me just for a quick story, in preparing my remarks today, I wanted to think a little bit about what life must have been like in 1942. So I dug into my collection of things at home, and I pulled out this coin. Now, you'll have to forgive me, you're going to have to squint to see it, but it's a rather bronzy looking coin, but if you look closer, you'll see it's Canada 5 cents. You know, we call these nickels today, and there's a reason they're made of nickel, except this one is made out of an alloy called tombac. It's kind of a bronze material. Does anyone know why they made tombac nickels? It's because they gathered up all the nickel they had here so they could send it overseas to make bullets. They couldn't even make nickels in Canada because of the effect of the war on our country, on our world, on our supply chains, on everything. Dieppe made up 10% of those deployed. Sorry, Torontonians made up 10% of those deployed to Dieppe. It's estimated that at least 187 Torontonians were killed on August 19th, and 17 died later as a result of their injuries, with more than 200 taken as prisoners of war. This remains the most deadly day for Toronto in all of the wars. Nowhere did this have a more important impact than here, where we are this evening, in what was East Toronto and East York. While some managed to get back to England, just a few numbers, 5,000 Canadians deployed, 2,200 returned. They were not left unscathed. The physical and psychological wounds stayed with every person who had landed at the beach that day. The trauma and grief remained with everyone who loved someone that never came home. These brave individuals were called upon to undertake the impossible, representing their country with bravery, selflessness, and an unwillingness to sit idly by. When speaking of war, we often talk about them in numbers. I just did. Deaths, survivors, army sizes, kilometers won and lost. But here in Toronto, the residents who participated in Dieppe were not just numbers. They were our friends, our neighbors, our sons, our husbands. There were the Montgomery twins, Ralph and Arthur, who grew up just around the corner on Greenwood, and who both tragically lost their lives at Dieppe at age 23. Or there was Sergeant Greenberg, who lived near Kensington Market. He wrote poetry, and he had worked as a tie cutter, safety on a landing craft, until he succumbed to his own injuries. When a country goes to war, everyone sacrifices. Toronto mothers joined the workforce to support their families while fathers were overseas. School children knitted 7-inch squares to be sewn into blankets as bundles for Britain. Young women signed up as nurses, typists, and auxiliary corps members to lend a hand in the war effort. You know, it just wasn't Tom Back Nichols. It was everybody. When the ceasefire finally came, communities pulled together to rebuild. East York cared for families who were grieving a lost one. Scarborough helped discharged servicemen find employment. Moore Park supported the veterans who were struggling to process their trauma. On August 19, 1942, Torontonians stepped up, and they gave the best of themselves to protect the future of this young country. Today we stand in Dieppe Park in honor of their sacrifice. While we can never repay these individuals, we can honor them by remembering who they were and what they did for the place we call home. Remember, it's a verb, it's an action, it's a responsibility. There's many ways to do it. We're going to unveil a little bit of that right now, but to the young people out there, I see you in the crowd. Go onto YouTube, go onto the internet, go onto the Veteran Affairs website and read some of the stories. Listen to them tonight. Put down your video games and your movies, because if you want to see what a real hero is, you're going to hear those stories. I would like to thank those who have participated in this project in this spirit of remembering. In particular, the support received from the MyTax Business Strategy Internship Program in eCampus, Ontario, who funded the research, and as well as the Veterans Affairs Canada Commemorative Partnership Program, and of course the Royal Canadian Legion, and the historians and the family members who have helped keep these stories alive over the years. The display we are unveiling today will be in this park until the end of August, and then it will be displayed in the Civic Centres, finishing at City Hall in November for Remembrance Week. We hope that through this initiative, many Toronto residents will learn about Dieppe and the impact on this city, as well as the sacrifice and contribution of its residents 80 years ago, lest we forget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Holliday, for those words tonight. We have many special guests here, but I just want to pay special tribute to all the veterans here tonight with us from Sunnybrook Hospital. Welcome to this very important occasion. We honor you. I'm very shortly going to call up our federal representative, MP Julie DeBrusen, because this project was generally supported by the Government of Canada through Veterans Affairs and Canada's Commemorative Partnership Program. But I also want to just make sure I recognize my fellow councillor, East York Councillor Brad Bradford, Ward 19. Thank you, Brad, for being with us tonight. And also our MPP, Peter Tabbins, newly opposition leader at Queen's Park. So thank you very much, Brad and Peter, for joining us for this important occasion. Julie, I really thank you very much for being here tonight, and I'd like to call you up now to say a few words on behalf of the Minister of Veterans Affairs and the Government of Canada. Thank you.
Always a challenge when you're a bit shorter than the crowd. Okay, I'll try it this way and we'll see. I want to thank all of you for being here today. It's actually, thank you so much. It's nice to see members of our community out to recognize this important date, participate in the memorial, to have our veterans here. Thank you so much for being here. Our Legion members who put a lot of work also into planning their own memorial over at the East York Cenotaph and to join us today. And to all members of the service. Every day, I am so grateful. Government's so grateful. Canadians are so grateful for the service of our armed forces and our military personnel. Today, we're taking a moment to recognize the raid on Dieppe, August 19th, 1942. 80 years ago was a day of tremendous sacrifice for Canadian soldiers, by Canadian soldiers. You've heard some of the numbers, and I won't go through the numbers again in detail, but it's really quite unbelievable when we think of the sacrifice that over 200 people from Toronto were lost on that day, and many others who returned were injured. And that's not just a Toronto number. This is an East End number in a very large park. We are in a park in the East End called Dieppe Park. It's not by accident. It's because the loss was born very largely here by our East End community. And it's really quite hard to fathom those numbers when you think of how small our city was at the time. It was a day when many families received notices across our East End community. And with that, we need to take the moment every year, really, to remember that tremendous loss and the impact it would have had here on our community. I was earlier today at the Métis Nation of Ontario's Assembly and took a moment to specifically recognize our Indigenous veterans and Indigenous participation at Dieppe. This year, we lost a veteran who had fought at Dieppe, Paul Delorme. He was 101 years old when we lost him. He had been taken as a prisoner of war and had shown amazing resilience. He'd actually escaped from being a prisoner of war twice and had fought valiantly and showed amazing resilience and was able to tell his story and to share it with us. And I think it's very important to recognize the sacrifice and the fighting by Indigenous soldiers as part of this as well. This morning our mayor talked about why it's so important that we recognize the Dieppe raid 80 years later. And I was thinking about it myself from a personal perspective because, like many people in Toronto, my family was not yet here in Canada. When we look at those larger numbers, those numbers came from people who came in large part to Canada since that time. My family was in Europe. And as a family in Europe, as a Jewish family from Europe, it is particularly important to me to recognize that so many people from this community and from our city went and fought for our freedom and for democracy and to save families like mine. And they had no personal connection to us. That is the ultimate meaning of sacrifice. And so I am deeply grateful personally for that sacrifice made by our soldiers. I want to take that moment to recognize the true selflessness of going and to fight in such a tremendous raid to save people who were in very, very dire straits. And we have Canadian soldiers to this day who are there to fight for freedom, for democracy, and to protect people right around the world, and that is an important thing for us to recognize. So I want to thank our veterans who are here with us today. I want to thank the family members who are going to talk to us about their family members who participated in the Dieppe raid, and take this extra moment to recognize thank you to all of you for coming, lest we forget.
Thank you, Julie, very much for those remarks and for sharing your personal insights from your family tonight, and also recognizing the tremendous contribution from this part of town to the Dieppe raid and to the armed forces. It is very special, and we do recognize that here. So many wonderful young men from this community that went to war and lost their lives in this particular raid. And we're going to remember the fallen in a very special way tonight, to honor the Torontonians who were killed at Dieppe or due to their injuries sustained at Dieppe, and they died. I would like to invite very special guests to place a poppy on the ribbon behind us, where you can see the ribbon, to pay tribute to those who lost their lives. And here we're going to put those up. Thank you very much. We'll give you, please. And once our special guests have placed these poppies, I invite those of you who are able to come forth and please add a poppy to the ribbon. So we will have 204 poppies displayed on this ribbon, one for each of the soldiers who died in the Dieppe raid. participating in this very meaningful little ceremony of the 204 poppies behind us here as we remember those who lost their lives in Dieppe and thank them for their sacrifice, as Julie so eloquently described. And it's a very beautiful visual remembrance that we've created here together here at Dieppe. Thank you, everybody, for participating in that. To honor the Torontonians that were killed, we know we have these beautiful poppies here. And thank you very much again to the Brass Quintet for your music during this very meaningful part of our ceremony and placing the poppies. I know you will have other selection, including Steve Mitchell's Men of Dieppe March, which was arranged for brass quintet by Mr. Roman Yasinski, a member of the band. Thank you very much. We'll be hearing that.
Would you hear it now?
No. I'd like to hear it now, but my script says we're going to hear that in a minute. I'd like to hear a lot of your music. It's beautiful here tonight. Thank you again for being here. There are hundreds of stories that can be told about the Dieppe raid, from soldiers who saw their friends die on the beach, to those who were taken as prisoners of war, to those who survived but suffered injuries and psychological trauma lasting most of their lives. We are honored to have so many family members of Dieppe soldiers here today, and we're going to hear from 3 family members who will share their unique stories. First, I would like Ted White, accompanied by his son Zachary, to speak about his uncle James, or Jim White, who was killed at Dieppe. Ted and Zachary, please come to the podium.
Okay, thank you for having us here tonight. During World War II, I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see. My father, Ron White, served in the Governor General's Horse Guards. His older brother, Jim, served in the Royal Regiment of Canada. My father did not speak of the war very often. He spoke even less of his brother. My father passed away in 1986 from pancreatic cancer. Many years after he passed, I found a letter from my Uncle Jim to my dad, Ron. My son, Zachary, is going to read that letter.
Hello, Ron. Sorry I couldn't write you sooner, as I have been pretty busy. I've been expecting a letter from you saying whereabouts you are. If I knew you had came, I would have seen you last Saturday. Instead, I went to Worthing with a girl I've got here. She's a honey, Ron. I was saying to her, if I knew where you were, we could go and see you. Now I'll have to wait a week or so I won't be able to get away. I got an idea where you might be, so if you mentioned, as you mentioned ATS, if it's Aldershot, say yes in your next letter, and I will try and get to see you as soon as possible. My buddy and I are not in the cookhouse no more. We gave it up. 2 long hours, 5 a.m. until 9 at night is no good, so we're back on the old square again. I seen Siago the other day before yesterday, or the day before yesterday, and he was sure glad to hear you where you were over here. He wants to see you too. The goddamn air raid sirens have been blazing away a lot the last week, and we've been getting a little shit too. Well, Ron, I'll save the news until I see you, which I hope is soon. It will have to be soon, or I won't see you for quite some time, if you know what I mean. So whenever you do write, soon as possible, and let me know where you are or where we could meet. I wrote home to Mother yesterday. I've received a few letters from home lately. I'll have to close soon, or I'll have to close now. Don't forget to write soon. Best of luck. Hope to see you soon. Your brother, Jim.
Jim's news never got delivered, and Ron never got to respond to the letter. Jim and Ron never saw each other again after that letter was written. Jim died on Blue Beach at Dieppe the morning after he wrote the letter.
In a field behind the town of Dieppe stands a small cemetery. Inside are rows of graves marked with the names and ages of soldiers, most of which are no older than 25. I was fortunate enough to visit the cemetery on a school trip to Vimy in 2017. In one of those graves rests my great uncle Jim. I am 22 years old. My uncle Jim enlisted before his 19th birthday. He died before his 22nd birthday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ted and Zachary, for that moving story and tribute, and for reading the words of your great uncle Jim. Very, very moving moment for us here tonight. One of the stories we tell in the display that we're going to be unveiling tonight is that of 4 Toronto soldiers, Campbell Brown, James Donald, William Olver, and Charles Surfless, who were all taken as prisoners of war and survived. They all became members of the Toronto Police Service, continuing their brave service to our city for over 30 years. On behalf of these soldiers, I would like to invite Doug Surfless to share a few memories of his father. Doug?
Hello everyone. I'm just going to leave my phone here because I've got about 5 minutes. If I keep talking, it'll be nighttime. So I'm just going to hit the go. So there you go. 5 minutes I got. So my story is my father is Sergeant Charles Surfless. He was a D Company Royal Regiment of Canada. I'm going to mention, as the BMC said, with regards to the other 3, which was Bill Olver, Campbell Brown, and Jimmy Donald. Their names will come into this in a minute. I'm going to talk about the POW experience. My dad's day started really bad. He, when he was at the back of the landing craft, probably saved his life, and he made it to the wall. Which time, at one point there, that Bill Olver actually jumped on top of him, and they became good friends after that, because he was on the seawall above. Moving forward, after the raid, at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it was over. The prisoners were taken by the Germans, and they were put into a schoolyard and to be assessed in the blazing sun. Now, I'm going to follow up on you with regards to age. My father was 22. Who here is 22 years old? Who wants to be 22 years old? Okay, lots of hands. Wonderful. Okay. So he was 22 years old that day, and Bill Olver was 23, 22. That was the average age. When he landed and was taken prisoner, they were all put into a yard like we're sitting in right now in the blazing sun. And then they were marched to cattle cars for transport to their prison camp. The cattle car was jammed with wounded, but they had to endure that with a bucket of water and a bucket for the washroom, and they were given 2 loaves of black moldy bread. And they had to go to endure that all the way to Lambsdorff, Germany, where they went to Stalag 8B. When they marched in, the Dunkirk guys were still there, and they were happy to see a friendly face. My dad's prisoner number was 26665. That meant he was the 26,000th prisoner in that camp, and it was mainly Commonwealth. What had endured after that was that the Canadians were all tied up. Originally, they were tied with their hands behind their back, and then they were tied to the front. That was because the German propaganda at the time found some German soldiers, unfortunately, on the beach, and they said they were tied up and shot, or in fact, they were making a run with the Canadians to the landing craft and got caught in the crossfire. Nevertheless, they had to be tied. They were tied up from the time they got left in the morning to the time they went to bed. But they thought, okay, we'll play with this. So what they did was they got in the morning, went to the desks or the tables. Germans would tie them up. They go back to the barracks, untie each other, and go back in line. So they could, all day long. So, okay, so the Germans thought, well, give them handcuffs. So they had to wear handcuffs that had a foot and a bit of chain, and that was their day. They had to wear them. Until the Red Cross packages and the Salvation Army packages came, and the Spam keys, they were able to make keys and open them. Because they were all volunteers. They were blacksmiths, keysmiths, cobblers. They were all this. So that's how they did. However, again, you're looking at 22, 23 years old. It was a winter's day. Campbell Brown took his handcuffs off. He was in the barracks, and there was a surprise inspection. He had just no shirt on, just pants. But this was in the winter time, and it was very cold. So as a punishment, they had to go. They took him outside, and they put his nose to the wall, and said, if you move, you're staying as long as we tell you to. It got to a point where they finally took him back in, and he was almost died as a result of that. But his barrack mates, they all got blankets. They made sure he was safe, but after that, they had to have a different way of taking the cuffs off. So finally, the cuffs were taken off about 18 months later. However, in 3 years, my father and the other prisoners had one shower, just one shower. They would have to go out into the courtyard and in the rain. That's the only time they had a shower. Again, 22, 23 years old. Then the war was getting to the end. In the camps there, they had to, when the Red Cross packages came in, this is how they bartered for food with the Germans. They traded for stuff, cigarettes, so forth. I'm over, but I'm going to keep going. Nevertheless, the life in the prisoner camp was very dodgy. It was not fun. 1945, the Russians were getting too close, so they upended them in January. It was called the Death March, and they force marched them west. Everybody had their own way of going here, going there, and some were liberated by the British, some were by the Americans. My dad was strafed by the British, unfortunately, because they thought they were Germans. So they came down the Typhoons and strafed the whole column there. Then he was finally liberated a week later by the British. He came home, he was discharged at the exhibition with several others. He needed a job. So the City of Toronto Police Department was hiring. He said, what did you do? He said, I'm a veteran. He said, you're hired. So what happened? His class in September 1945, he walks in, and there sitting in that class was Bill Oliver and Cam Brown. Jimmy Donald did the class the month before. All of them had gone separate ways after that beach. Each thought that maybe they didn't survive. And there they were, all police officers with the Toronto Police for 40 years. He retired in 1985. But their life at that age, where we're all happy at 22 and 23, was remarkable how they survived that. And here we are today, 80 years later. And I would like to also, before I go, I would like to thank the City of Toronto. I would like to thank Laura Jane, Dana, Nancy, and Richard for everything they've done to make this day possible. And I applaud you. Thank you very much. So that's the end of my story. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Doug. Your dad was a really great guy. Our final story will come from John Mitchell about his father, Stephen Henry Mitchell. Please, thank you.
Private Stephen Henry Mitchell, father, was born in Toronto in 1917, the son of a Cornish immigrant and an English mother who was sent to Canada as a British home child. He matured as a youth living through the struggles of the Great Depression of the 30s. During this period, music became his companion and his escape from the hard times of the era. Then war descended on the planet once more. Father joined the Royal Regiment of Canada the same day England declared war on Germany in support of their French allies. Basic training at Fort York, 7 months in Iceland. Then on to England for the next 2 years in preparation for the Dieppe raid, 80 years ago today. I can scarcely imagine the horrors he saw and heard on the beach that day. Struggling over mud and hard stone, over bodies, and surrounded by the screams of his fellow warriors begging for mercy. All the while, death screaming down from the heavens and landing all around him. Complete chaos. Then came the penalty of incarceration. 3 years in the prison of war camps in Mahlsdorf, then Mulhausen, surrounded by the survivors of Dunkirk who were taken 2 years before. He then lent his talents to the camp band, the Britanniques, to bring comfort and solace to his fellow Kriegies, helping to endure the endless hours of boredom and stress. They were tasked to create order within the camp, signaling time to wake up, meal times, lights out, and supply revelry through every kind of variety show imaginable. The men of the band used their elevated status as musicians to get under the skin of their jailers at every turn by sarcastically rewriting the lyrics of famous German songs. In addition, they used their instruments against their jailers, signaling surprise inspections, diverting German attention from subversive actions, and masking the sounds of tunneling activities that eventually led to the escape of 52 men. That was the Mahlsdorf camp. The Mahlsdorf exodus led Hitler to order all escaped out-of-uniform prisoners to be executed as spies, a fate that befell the brave Canadian British flyers from Stalag Luft 3 a few short weeks later, an action that later became known to us all as the Great Escape. Upon liberation, he flew back to England and married Doreen Margie Cambridge, a fellow Torontonian, who incidentally served as a quack, Canadian Women's Auxiliary Corps, in England during those war years. And the two returned to Toronto to reside for the next decade until Father's health began to decline. They moved with their 4 children to Muskoka. Anguished for years on what he and his fellow combatants had endured during the war at the hands of the German Empire, he sought to get it out. He put pen to paper many times to tell their story, sometimes through his music. As a result, he penned the official march of the Dieppe Veterans and Prisoner of War Association, Men of Dieppe. Sometimes he spoke through the written word in 2 books chronicling the affair. They Were Invincible was first published in 1976, and his original full version book, Profile on 12 Platoon, languished unpublished for years. Father passed away in May of 1994, and Mother a few years later in 2008, after which I inherited my father's intellectual properties. And as a tribute to the man, I decided to self-publish his 3 books on Amazon's Kindle Books in 2018. This brings me to the reason why I'm sharing all of this with you. It was during the electronic transcription of his original book, Profile on 12 Platoon, that I was digging through his stack of handwritten manuscripts when I came across an untitled poem clearly in Dad's hand. I've never known my father to write a poem. Clearly, he had something on his mind. And as I read his verse, emotion surged to the surface. It had a profound effect on me, so I gave it a title and included it in his book as a bonus. To me, it tells the story of a simpler time when war rose up to create turmoil in the world around him and create a great rift within, a conflict found in the soul of every warrior since time immemorial. With this I present Of War by Private Stephen Henry Michel. Of war. What has happened to the world we once knew? The world that vibrated with the warmth of human friendship, a love of simple things, an old beat-up jalopy, a guitar, the twinkling lights of small towns passed in the moonlight. In those not so far distant days, we laughed, loved, and danced to the throbbing beat of drums and keening note of saxophones and strident brass. With full hearts and empty pockets, we toasted Eros and were gay. Then came the call. The bugles blew. And like the fools of every generation, we responded to the sound. Aware, as all the world was well aware, a monster had arisen and must be speedily dispatched, demolished, and interred. The follies of the father must be passed down to the sons, as it has ever been since time immemorial, and therefore we must answer the folly of Versailles. In our blood, and in the blood of millions upon millions far away, the debt must be repaid. And as we went, millions of marching feet, each of us wearing bandoliers filled with tiny messengers of death, small, lethal hornets, that hum and kill, dispatched from tubes of steel, each one intended for the heart of a brother far away. When Cain slew Abel, he was condemned by his kind, outcast, adrift, a creature to be avoided and abhorred, while we, the product of a higher degree of culture, were dispatched with love and kisses from our kin, and the blessings and prayers of the clergy. It just shows how much we've advanced in a few thousand years. 3,000 miles away, our brothers waited for us to arrive, so that they could match their powers of annihilation with ours. There was nothing personal about it. It's just that they were under orders, as were we. The lies we both were told were superfluous, just fodder for our consciences. On no account must we be allowed to bear the guilt of having violated the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." Thou shalt not. Stephen Henry Michel. Sorry.
So much, John, for sharing those memories of your incredible father Doug, for your memories of your amazing father, and Zachary and Ted for your wonderful uncle who didn't make it back home. I think that your memories tonight have given us a very unique look into the people that went to Dieppe and given us even more meaning at this ceremony tonight. And I want to thank you on behalf of everyone here for the sharing of those very important memories of these three wonderful men. Thank you very much. And we will now unveil the display that will be here in the park. And it will tell the story of Toronto's participation in the raid. And I would ask our special guests to come forth and unveil the panels. Would you like a countdown? No, I'm going to count them in. We'll go. Here. We're just going to wait for the veteran. Please, he's coming to unveil. A couple more people, please. Thank you. I know this is very meaningful for everyone. Wait for everybody to get in position. We ready? Thank you. I'll count from 3, 3, 2, and 1. Thank you. We'll all have a chance to read these boards and read this display when we wrap up tonight. And I want to thank everybody for attending. This display will remain here in the park till the end of the month. And then in September, it will move to the Scarborough Civic Center. We'll go to the North York Civic Center, the Etobicoke Civic Center, and finally at Toronto City Hall for Remembrance Week, November 4th to the 11th. The display is also replicated with additional information added on the city's website. You can go to toronto.ca/Dieppe80 and see everything plus more. A project of this size would not be possible without the assistance of so many people. The City of Toronto would like to thank the MyTax and eCampus programs, the Government of Canada through the Veterans Affairs Community Commemoration Program, the Royal Canadian Legion, historians and members of the Royal Regiment of Canada, the Toronto Scottish Regiment, the Royal Engineers and others, the Blue Beach Everyman Remembers Project, researcher Dana Smokam, and the many family members, residents, and friends who shared their stories. The East York Foundation has kindly provided refreshments tonight. And I would like to thank the city's protocol department for a beautiful job on this commemoration and bringing us all together here tonight for the 80th anniversary of the Dieppe Parade. Thank you very much. Again, friends, thank you so much for attending. We will never forget the sacrifices made at Dieppe. To conclude this ceremony, please rise, if you are able, for the playing of O Canada by the Royal Regiment. much. Lest we forget, go in peace.
Hold on.